Hello, and welcome to the Psych Leadership Podcast, the show that helps you understand psychological growth, leadership, and making big moves in your life and career. I'm your host, UpChurch, and today we're going to talk about feedback without fear, how to hear the hard things. So the truth is, nobody really likes hearing feedback. We have this negative connotation in our mind that feedback automatically means that we have screwed up, right? That somebody is going to coach us, somebody is going to tell us how we could be better. And so it's normal to feel a little defensive about that. It can sting a little, right? It can feel personal, and it can even shake your confidence. But what if the very thing that we fear, that criticism, could be the key to helping us unlock some personal growth? Well, today we're going to talk about how you can hear those hard things through the lens of a growth mindset and feedback intervention theory so that you can turn the feedback into fuel for success. So when we talk about feedback specifically in leadership or career advancement, personal growth, like I said, it's tough not to take it personal. But for me, I mean, I can tell you several stories actually where feedback has kind of shifted things for me. So, for example, those of you that have seen me in person, I'm not a big guy by any stretch, but I do have a kind of a long beard and tattoos, and I've got full sleeves on both arms. And so a lot of times when I walk into a room, people get a little bit intimidated. And I didn't realize this for a long time. I'm not sure if it's just the way that I carry myself, the tone of my voice, the confidence that I try to embody. Um, in any case, I got the feedback on a couple different occasions that I intimidated folks. In fact, I had a meeting at one point. One of my bosses, this has been years ago, but he said, people are put off by your use of big words. He said, you have this intimidating presence to begin with, and then you come in using what he said was PBS words. And I said, well, I'm not trying to belittle anybody. I use a strong vocabulary because I read a lot, right? Like that's my passion. I don't mean anything by it. I'm not trying to sound smarter than somebody else or belittle them in any way. I'm just speaking with the words that make sense to me. And he said, well, consider this. Just know your audience a little bit. Understand to whom you're speaking and the language that they need to hear it in, not the way that not your inner monologue, so to speak, but what does your audience need to hear? How do they need to absorb that information? And at the time, I was maybe a little too immature to take that the way it was intended. So at first I kind of, I did what a lot of people do with feedback. I kind of bottled that up a little bit. I thought to myself, well, if you're intimidated when I talk and you don't like the words that I use, then maybe I just won't talk. Right. I'll go to these meetings and I'll just shut up. I'll just sit there and shut up and do my job. And then you guys can feel better about it. So I had pretty immature take on it. Over time, I kind of thought that through a little bit better and realized that there was some wisdom in what he was saying. I started really focusing on what does my audience need to hear? How am I presenting this data? And what is the language of that audience? So, for example, now when I go to do a presentation, I like to do a little bit of research on the demographic. I like to understand what lens are they looking at this presentation through. And so, for example, the team that I work with and my day job, I work in cybersecurity. And so a lot of that team, cybersecurity typically has some folks in there that have a finance background. Obviously you want your money to be as secure as possible, and that means that your identity has to be secure with it. So it makes sense, right? A lot of folks in cybersecurity had some sort of background in finance. A lot of those folks are also very type A personality and tend to focus more on facts versus the empathetic side of things. And so if you come at that audience, if I go to present an idea in the cybersecurity space and I come at it with, how does this help us from a cultural standpoint? How does this help us? How does this tackle the problem from an emotional stance? I'm probably going to lose that audience. Right? It's not about just using big words. It's about using the words that make sense to that group of people. And so with that in mind, before I do a presentation, like I said, I'll go back and kind of research who's the audience and how do they need to hear it. And then I tweak my message. So that's a simplistic example, but here one person took the opportunity to give me that feedback, and it completely shifted my perspective. Now, it's still something that I'm working towards. It's still something that I always try to be cognizant of. It's difficult to take something that's an opportunity for yourself and turn that into a strength, but you can usually mitigate it. And so that's what I'm going to challenge you to do as you hear that feedback. Again, our brains interpret criticism as a threat, right? It attacks our ego, our identity, our self-image. But there's this concept in psychology. It's called the feedback intervention theory, abbreviated as FIT. That feedback can either improve performance or derail it, depending on how it's delivered and how it's received. So how do we migrate that then to a growth mindset? Well, there's the psychologist, Carl Dweck, and he really focused on the idea of abilities are not fixed, but they do grow with effort. So that's exactly what I was just saying there, that it's tough to take an opportunity that you have and mitigate that or turn it into a strength rather. But if you put some effort into it, you can at least mitigate it. You can grow that skill a little bit. When we believe that we can improve, feedback stops being an attack and starts being a roadmap. Right. So, for example, if you get the feedback that you're not great at presentations, that isn't necessarily, that shouldn't derail you, right? Even if the person doesn't necessarily deliver it correctly, right? If they just tell you you suck, go away, right? You can still seek to understand. You can still ask, well, why do you feel that my presentation was ineffective? Why, what could I have done differently? So if you can pivot from that, then the feedback starts to give you steps into basically how you can grow. So let's talk about some strategies for receiving that feedback then without fear. So the first thing that I'm going to tell you to do is always pause before reacting, right? Take a breath, regulate your emotions. So I mentioned before in my example, when I first heard that feedback, that I came off as intimidating, that I was using too many big words, I really took that to heart, right? And if I would have outwardly reacted the way that I did in my own mind, right? I thought to myself, well, I'll just shut up, right? That sounds like what a kid would say. That sounds like what, my teenagers might say. But if we swallow that down a little bit, think through it, and maybe even seek to ask some additional questions, or if nothing else, I always try to think through what was going on in that person's life that gave them that particular reaction, right? We have no idea what led a person to a given view on the world. And so sometimes the feedback is really just their problem, but sometimes there's something we can learn. So pause before you react, really reflect on it. The next step is to seek that clarity. So even if the delivery wasn't great in terms of the person giving you that feedback, you can still ask for an example. So instead of just shutting it down, like I said, when I was told that I was intimidating, okay, is there something that I'm doing? Is it the way I'm standing? Is it my tone of voice? And I mean, another example that this person gave me is they said, well, you don't tend to smile a lot. Well, for me, I don't smile a lot because a lot of times, frankly, I'm in my own head, especially before a presentation. Those of you that have been on the podcast for a while know that I do consider myself much more an introvert than an extrovert. And so when I come into a room and I'm getting ready to present, I'm not smiling because not it has nothing to do with the my level of happiness or something like that as I walk in the room. It's not that I'm not excited for the opportunity, it's that I'm intimidated, right? I don't necessarily wanna be there, so I'm stuck in my own head. I'm going through the rehearsal of what I'm going to say and how I'm going to say it and how my transitions are going to be, and so because of that, I tend to have, what do we call it? The, RBF, resting bitch face, right? I kinda come into the room looking like I've been told I come in looking like I'm going to start punching people, that I almost look angry. And like I said, it's not that I'm angry, it's that I'm in my own head. But by taking that and by asking for those examples, how am I intimidating? Well, you don't smile. Okay, I understand why I don't smile. What steps can I do to mitigate that? Well, maybe if I practice a little bit more up front and prepare a little bit more, then I'd have more opportunity to be in the moment. And in turn, that helps me to connect with my audience, which means that my message lands better anyway, right? If I can come in and shake a couple hands and talk to a couple people, that's uncomfortable for me. However, it does kind of break the ice a little bit. And so because I prepared, I'm less intimidated by the situation. And because I've made some connections in the room, I'm less intimidated by the situation, which means that my message lands better. A, because I'm not coming off as intimidating because I came in smiling. And B, because I've made that connection with my audience. Okay. So the next step for you is, after you've sought that clarity, reframe it a little bit. So don't just take the feedback for face value. Really think about how you can use it to grow, and then express your gratitude to the person for having the guts to speak up. Right? How often do you see folks that go through their life never being told that they're not good at something or that they could improve? I'll give you a prime example. When I was growing up, I used to love to sing, really enjoyed it. And I was constantly told, that I had a nice voice. And I took that to believe that I actually could carry a tune. I finally had somebody that, and again, the delivery was poor, but I had somebody that said, you're really singing off key. And in fact, I think what he told me is you can't carry a tune in a bucket. That was his exact words. But so I started working on that. I started, well, okay, I disagree. I really like to sing, and everybody's told me that I'm good. Well, were they just blowing smoke? Right? Were they just giving me feedback because I was a little kid and they didn't want to, ruin my confidence or something like that? Maybe, possibly. But I started kind of turning that around. I expressed my gratitude to the person, hey, yeah, thanks for letting me know. Right? It's kind of like if you walk into a room and you've got, a bat in the cave, snot on your face and you don't realize it, or celery in your teeth and somebody finally points it out. It's not great to hear, but at least they cared enough about you and your situation to point out, hey, that's something you might want to fix. Okay. So express that gratitude and then again, go back and reframe it. But ultimately, you have to act on it. So even when I was told, hey, you can't carry a tune in a bucket. Okay. Well, but that's something I can work on. right? I can take lessons. I can use a pitch pipe. I can make sure that I'm singing on key. In this case, the biggest problem that I had is that I wasn't used to having monitor speakers. And so once I had something on which to base my voice, I ended up, at least I think I improved anyway. I'm not going to be on any records anytime soon, but I enjoyed it. All right. So then let's flip the script just a little bit. We've talked a lot about receiving feedback. What about from a leadership perspective? So, how do you as a leader now deliver that feedback? So, many of you listening to this podcast are probably new in your career. That's typically the type of audience that we pull in with this podcast. So you're new in your career, and in some cases, you might be put in a position where you are actually leading folks that have a few years on you, right? And so immediately there, you're at a little bit of a disadvantage. There's a sense of pride that as a, once you hit that certain age, I mean, it'd be like even if you are fresh out of college right now, if a 5-year old came up and tried to tell you how to do your job, you might take offense to that, right? You might pull back. Well, who's this little pipsqueak telling me what I think I know? You've gone to college for it, etc. So folks tend to take that feedback negatively. Um, and so as a leader, it's important that you set the tone and how you and how you receive and provide feedback. What I typically do with my folks, whenever I start working with somebody new, whether they've just started working on my team, or even if I just hired them myself, inherited or or direct, I like to set the tone with them and let them know the type of leader I am and kind of what my expectations are. And at that point, I open the door for feedback and I let them know that it's two ways, right? I tell my folks, if you have to ask the question, does Luke approve of what I'm doing? If you have to ask, then I have failed. Ideally, I should be, as a leader, I should be giving you that feedback consistently, not at the end of the year, not during your end of year review. That's not the time to pull off the veil and say, oh, you've been screwing up for 12 months and now I'm going to tell you, now I'm going to hold it against you, in terms of raises and things like that. You want to give your feedback to folks all the time. And remember, we have this negative connotation of feedback. Feedback is just, hey, you're doing it this way and it would be more effective if you do it that way. Okay. So I tell my team all the time, I'm going to provide you feedback in the moment, whether you're doing something stellar and I'm looking for that to continue, or whether I need you to pivot a little bit. But I also let them know that I expect the exact same thing, that I'm doing that out of respect for them and their performance and their contributions to the company or to the job or whatever it is we're doing, whatever we're partnering on. But that I want the same respect from them, that I can't be an effective leader if I don't know what works well for them. So let's go back a little bit. I talked to you before about about how I took the feedback that I came off as intimidating and I tried to adjust that to my audience a little bit. I tried to shift my presentation and the way that I'm sharing information so that it caters to the person that I'm speaking with in that moment. Well, the same thing applies as a leader, right? If I'm trying to give feedback to somebody, some folks are going to receive that feedback differently than others. Some folks, for example, I've got a guy on my team, he doesn't really get into the emotional side of things. If he's doing it wrong, he wants to know, hey, so and so, you're doing this wrong. This is how I expect it to be done. Right? He doesn't, and he doesn't deal well with ambiguity. So he needs to know directly, this is where you made a mistake and this is where we should have gone. Okay? He's not looking for any fluff. Now, I've got another person on the team. She wants to know a little bit more about the details, just the raw feedback, how she can get better, but not the in the weeds, do this step, do that step. She's looking for guardrails. And so that's an important distinction. Not everybody needs the play by play. Some folks are going to need just the parameters, and then they want to figure it out on their own. So I set the tone with my team so that they understand that I am open to that. That as much as I want to be able to provide them feedback in a meaningful way, that I want them to provide me that feedback so that I know my audience, so that what I share with them is going to resonate. And with that, that means that we have to emphasize the concept of psychological safety, right? Teams are going to thrive when feedback is normalized, when they understand that every time that I touch base with them, I'm going to tell them what did I perceive them doing really well and where do we need some growth? And I want that same feedback to me, right? Did I give you feedback in a way that wasn't helpful, or maybe I didn't give you enough or gave you too much direction, right? If we can set that stage and make sure that folks are well aware that we have psychological safety, that I want them to speak up, I want them to have an opinion, then they're more willing to give that opinion. A leader openly shares feedback that they receive and how they've acted on it. And by doing that, you create the vulnerability, you open that door and let them know that, again, feedback is always going to be a two-way street. So, in closing, folks, the big idea here is that there shouldn't be a fear associated with feedback. It's not a negative thing. No different than coaching is not a negative thing. You can tell somebody when they have done great. You can tell them when they need to pivot, and they can tell you too. So I'm going to challenge you this week. Lean into one piece of feedback, and I want you to reframe that with a growth mindset. Don't pay attention to exactly how it was delivered, but how can you grow from it? And even if you don't agree with it, understand that perception is reality. So if that one person had the guts to tell you, to give you that feedback, chances are other folks had the same kind of reaction. So you don't have to agree with it, but you have to know it's there. All right. So thanks for listening to this week's Psych Leadership Podcast. If today's episode gave you a new way of thinking about feedback, share it with somebody that could use a little bit of encouragement. And don't forget to follow us so that you never miss an episode. We'll talk soon.
Hey, you made it all the way to the end of the podcast. Thanks so much for your time today. If you like this content, I'm going to ask that you consider a small donation. Every little bit helps, but this allows us to continue not only doing the podcast, but actually offering the internship positions, the leadership conferences, as well as the in-person courses that we deliver to high school and college students. Think about hitting the donation button for me. And again, we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.